Okay, two big decisions that could throw the balance of power in the Senate up for grabs. Today, Independent Senator Joe Lieberman out of Connecticut. Caucuses with the Democrats will announce that he will not seek re-election. Kent Conrad, a Democrat out of North Dakota, says he will not run either. Here's Conrad.
A remarkable experience. I've done my level best, but I really want to focus in these last 2 years on getting our fiscal house in order.
The guy he was a fiscal hawk. Says he can do better outside the Senate than he can in the Senate. What kind of a statement is that about the U.S. Senate? Karen Henready, former communications director for the National Republican Congressional Committee, and former Clinton pollster Bernard Whitman. Bernard, good morning to you. Karen, good morning to you as well. Good morning. Here's the scenario now. You have Democrats in the next election defending 23 seats in the Senate, Republicans only 10. How's that factor in, Karen?
Well, you know, all we have is the political landscape as we know it today. And as we know it today, Kent Conrad would very likely have lost that seat when he's up for re-election. I'm not really surprised he retired. I think we're likely to see more retirements. Ben Nelson in Nebraska, I think, is very vulnerable. Bill Nelson in Florida, very vulnerable. But Joe Lieberman's retirement, probably more than likely, that seat is going to stay in Democrat hands. Joe Lieberman acted like a Democrat, voted like a Democrat, and I think that state will stay Democrat.
He had a very interesting history politically over just, the past 10 years when you go back to the election of 2000 and then his friendship with John McCain and Lindsey Graham. How do you see it, Bernard?
My greatest concern, Bill, is that Conrad and Lieberman's announcements removed two more centrists from an increasingly polarized Congress. You know, the House centrists were decimated in last year's election when most of the blue dog Democrats lost their seats. And I'm afraid that this troubling political vibe is starting to make its way over to the Senate, where the American people increasingly want their leaders to govern from the center. But unfortunately, our elected political class more and more represents the fringes of either party. And I think it's going to be incumbent upon the Democrats to work very hard over the next few years on candidate recruitment, particularly in places like the heartland, lest it looks like we begin to cede the middle of the country to the Republicans, which would be a terrible abrogation of responsibility.
Well, what about Karen's plan? Are there more in line that are set to resign? Or not seek re-election, more accurately?
My biggest concerns center around seats that Karen mentioned, as well as Dick Lugar's seat. Dick Lugar has been a responsible centrist on a range of issues, including national security and immigration.
But he's a Republican.
Exactly.
She mentioned Nelson,
but
sir,
Ben Nelson, Herb Kohl may not run again. He's getting up there in years, and we could face increasing pressure. But look, the fact is, the Tea Party on the right continues to try to dominate the Republican Party. And I think ultimately, if the Tea Party continues to drive the Republicans to the right, and we get increasingly primary challenges from the left on the Democratic side, the big losers are going to be the American people who want their government to govern from the center.
But balance of power in the Senate, 51-47, Democrats have the edge, 2 independents. Karen, quick question about what Ken Conrad's resignation, sorry, I keep saying that, it's my mistake. He would not seek re-election. Well, when he says that, this is a guy who's known as a fiscal hawk. Here's a guy who was elected to Congress in the early 90s and said, if we do not have a balanced federal budget within a year, then I won't run for re-election. He stuck to his word, by the way, but later came back and voted when a seat reopened in his home state. When he says, I can do more good on the outside than I can on the inside, what does that say to the American people about the effectiveness of Congress?
Well, I think, the fact that we saw so many Democrat seats go Republican in this last election cycle, and that we're looking at so many of these moderate Democrat seats, let's include Mary Landrieu from Louisiana in there as well. These are Democrats who are constantly having to fight against their own administration, whether it's on cap and trade, whether it's on health care or offshore oil drilling. The question is, do these members of Congress, Democrats, want to spend the next 6 years, if they think President Obama is going to be reelected, fighting against their own administration, fighting for the people in their districts against an agenda, a Democratic agenda, that the people in their districts simply do not agree with?
It almost sounds like friendly fire. I got to run, Bernard, to give you the last word quickly.
I tell you, my greatest concern is the primary process, which is increasingly giving us candidates to the left and the right of the political mainstream. And the concern isn't so much the administration, but whether these two parties are going to open themselves up and allow the political center of the American people to express their voice in the upcoming elections.
Voters will decide that ultimately. Bernard, thank you. Karen, thank you as well. 21
Thanks
minutes now before.